talk about Shelley Zimmerman back in Dallas today. When I was growing up in Haverhill, Massachusetts, I would listen to my parents' conversations, and I would sometimes hear them talk about the rabbi who served the small temple in Haverhill. The conversation often went something like this. The rabbi might not be in the best place. Perhaps you should have chosen another field. Maybe you should have been a professor. Or perhaps you should have been a lawyer. Any other career than rabbi. When we talk about our speaker, Shelley Zimmerman, today, we know that Rabbi Zimmerman was born to be a rabbi. Even if he weren't descended from 10 generations of Russian rabbis on his father's side, he still would have found his way to the rabbinate. Of course, it is our great good fortune that he was rabbi of Temple Emmanuel from 1985 to 1996. During that time, his dynamic leadership led to greater attendance of worship services, a wider range of programs and celebratory festivals, and crowded Torah classes. Rabbi Zimmerman always said, young people don't want to be an audience, they want to participate. And participate they did. I always think of Shelley, as he liked to be called, as a cheerleader, a champion of the congregation, a champion of the temple staff, a champion for Judaism. Personally, I felt that he was immensely supportive of anybody in need. He was always ready to lend his help. He was immensely supportive and usually tried to help people in whatever predicament or position they found themselves in, that they were unhappy about or needed really loving care. And he usually had a good suggestion or solution for everybody who came to him or that he came to in need. He interacted, he was available, he communicated. It is my privilege to welcome my Rabbi, Sheldon Zimmerman, back to Dallas.
You know how long I waited to speak from the pulpit of Sheriff Israel? Gerry Cristol, thank you. And not just for the words, but thank you, Gerry, for the extraordinary work that you have brought of your person and self into helping Dallas recognize the contributions of Dallas Jews to the welfare of this community. Your book, your lectures, your archival enterprise have made an extraordinary difference. So on behalf of someone who some consider an adopted Dallasite, I see myself more as a native Dallasite. Because I was here enough hours to do that. Thank you. Thank you. Friends, it's wonderful to be here. It's wonderful to be back, and I'm so grateful to you for being here. And I hope all of you will become members of the Dallas Jewish Historical Society. And the reason I say that to you is because it is essential to make clear to the North American Jewish community the precious gem that is the Dallas Jewish community. Judy and I have now lived in enough cities and been in enough places to know that the Dallas Jewish community is a unique and precious jewel in the crown of North American and world Jewry. And the trouble is you haven't told the story well. And the way you're going to help tell the story well is through books like Gerry's and through being members of a historical society, the Dallas Jewish Historical Society, which will make the mission to tell the story an important one. Now, I for many years did not think that telling the story was that important, until I realized in traveling around this country, until I realized that all the work that so many organizations were trying to do and the millions that have been spent was really catch-up work to make the rest of the North American Jewish community far more like the Dallas Jewish community. And I say that with heartfelt gratitude for the friendships that have been formed. Now, let me put this out there. This last year and a half has not been an easy one. You know it. The Dallas Morning News continue to make that clear. So we might as well know. Let's just put it out there straight. But can I tell you something? Had it not been for you, your letters, your calls, Shelley Zimmerman would not have made it through that year. So I want you to know that I treasure you for who you are as people who care, and never let that be forgotten. That is of essence. And I'm not afraid of putting it out there. Someday we'll take on the media in their own place. You never win when you take them on. So I've been very quiet. But for me and Judy, my beloved Judy, who is with me and stands by my side through all this, for me and Judy, your love is precious. And if I haven't told you that yet, I'm telling it to you now. And pass the word. Pass the word. Dallas is our home. Now, so often, let me get on to the lecture, and for those of you who have not had a good night's sleep in a long time, since my last sermon at the Temple in Dallas, welcome to Nap Time with Sheldon. Now, when we Jews, and most Jews, look at the history of the American Jewish community, we think monolithically. Most Jews in New York don't even know they're Jews outside of New York. They'll accept some in Los Angeles, but they don't know what to do with anywhere in between. But we look at it that way, and it's the same way we look at Jewish history as a whole. We see bits and parts and think it's the whole story. We study about European Jewry. We spend a lot of time studying about Eastern European Jewry, for example, and little about everybody else in the world. We're quite surprised when we get to Israel and realize that Eastern European Jews are less than half of the country. Who are these other people? Why didn't we know about them? Why didn't we study about them in our Sunday schools and Hebrew schools? What about these Sephardic Jews? Who are these people, these Eastern Jews? Or we talk about shtetl life as if all Jews went through a shtetl. It's not true. Most Jews don't come from shtetls, but we think they all did. We all think of all of our ancestors as, I guess, Zero Mostel and Fiddler on the Roof, or something like that. But that was not the true story. I'll never forget once speaking to a woman who traced her ancestry to the 12th century in Spain, and really had a line that was clear. We Ashkenazi Jews get messed up in the 1500s for all kinds of historical reasons. And I used the word Yiddishkeit. And she looked at me, Inez Fidanki, and said, Fidanki, that is a Jewish name, by the way. And she looked at me and she said, Yiddishkeit? What is Yiddishkeit? And I said, we used to call her Mama. I said, I'm sorry. you want to say Ladino-kite for the language maybe you were speaking? Then she really gave me a nasty look and she said, we never spoke Ladino, we spoke Spanish. German Jews who are here present, we never spoke Yiddish, we spoke German, right? All that sense of history is the same, but I shared that with you because the story of American Jewish history is not a monolithic story. It's a story of different communities in different places. New York is not like Los Angeles. I don't have to tell you that. The Midwest is not the Northeast. The second largest Jewish community today is where, do you know? North America. Where is it? What? Florida. Where in Florida? From south of Miami to north of Boca. In that narrow strip live 750,000 Jews today. Now, is anyone telling that story? Most Jews don't even know that. And they think they're all old folk. Well, if you drive there, you might think that. However, the reality is that there's a very young, new community growing up, and there are no Jewish institutions. There's no major Jewish library. There's no major Jewish educational centers. They're flying to catch up. I say that because the story in the South and Southwest is a different story from the rest of the North American Jewish story. And it's a good story. And it's a story that needs to be told, and it's a story that needs to be replicated. And what has been done here is still not being done in other parts of North America. Let me just talk a little bit with you about that today. Dallas, as we know, is not just the Bible Belt. In fact, Rabbi Jordan Offsider, in whose distinguished pulpit I now stand, because for many years he spoke from this pulpit and preached from it, Jordan always said, we're not simply in the Bible Belt in Dallas, we're in the buckle of the Bible Belt. This is the heartland. For those who can buckle their belts, which for me is sometimes a problem, but for those of us who can, you know where the buckle is. This is the heartland of biblical Christianity. The Jews come to Dallas, to this strange place in this strange land. They come to one of the most highly Christian identified places in the world. In New York, no one will say to you in your first few conversations, which church do you go to? I'm talking about Christians, forget about Jews. All right? No Jew in his right mind would ask another Jew what synagogue you go to, because either you'll get a nasty answer, you'll get involved in what does it mean to be a Jew. And I avoid those conversations. But if you come to Dallas within the first 10 minutes of your conversation, people will say, well, what church do you go to? And they don't mean that in a bad sense. They come to you and they will say, and you say to them, listen, but I'm Jewish. Right away, the next line is, well, what temple do you go to? Because in this city, to be identified religiously is a significant part of who you are. Now, it doesn't mean you're a religious person. It means you're a member of something religious. Jews come to Dallas small in number, not like the Northeast at all. Jews come to Dallas, a city removed from major centers of Jewish population, activity, education, and culture. This is not the heartland of Jewish life. In fact, many Dallas Jews feel isolated from the rest of the Jewish world. Now, I'm not talking about today. Things have changed. I'm talking about the Dallas that was. You had to go far to find rabbis. You had to go far to find teachers. You had to go far to bring in culture. I mean, you have to import klezmer bands from Houston, that center of Jewish life. There's a major influx, as we all know, after World War II from the north, northeast, Holocaust Jews. This community was so insulated that people to this day can tell you when somebody else came to Dallas. You said, they're Dallasites. Oh, no, they're not. They came in 48. 52. It's changing today because you originals are being flooded by all us foreigners. But the reality is that this was a place unlike other places. The battle with the Klan. How many communities really went through a real struggle with the KKK? This community did. And Jews led the struggle, whereas in other parts of the South they were hiding in their houses like it was a pogrom in Poland. In the city of Dallas, Jews stood up. God bless Rabbi David Lefkowitz, Alav Shalom, as he fought the Klan in the culture and economy and streets of Dallas. One great thing the Dallas Morning News was involved in was in that struggle for justice. From the beginning, and this is something I discovered being here, the sense of loyalty to being Jewish, not being Jewish in a European way, but being Jewish. The loyalty to the need of creating institutions of meaning and significance, whether they were religious institutions, whether they were educational institutions, whether they were benevolent institutions, whether it was maintaining cemeteries. I decided I'm not naming any names in my talk today because I leave so many out. I'm not going to name names, but you know the people I'm talking about. In New York City, the synagogue I was rabbi of sold its cemetery because it was such a money-losing proposition. Can you imagine? You can quote me back because I made myself well known. They didn't care what I had to say either. I'm used to that. They only spent $40 million rebuilding their sanctuary after a fire, but they couldn't maintain their cemetery. I have nightmares every night because of the people I buried there with the promise that we would care for them after they were gone. But here, from the beginning, people who cared, people who created, and above all, there was this mission: how to be at home in Dallas, which is different from the rest of the world, how to be at home in Texas, also a different place, how to be at home in America, and how to be at home Jewishly. Dallas Jews really had a set of challenges at every level in order to build the life that we now take for granted, Dallas Jewish life. Let's talk about some of those. When I was told to go 40 minutes, now those of you from Temple and Manual know 40 minutes for Zimmerman is generally extended. It's like a basketball game. That's how you count the time, right? But I'll stay with my time. First, one of the most unique things about the Dallas Jewish community in being good citizens and being good neighbors was a close connection with Jews in other communities. Because we were so small, you couldn't be Jewish alone. You had to reach out to San Antonio, to Houston, to Fort Worth. You had to reach out to communities beyond yourself because in isolation, or feeling isolated, you knew you couldn't do it yourself. So from the start, Dallas Jews had connections to all other communities. Southern communities, southwestern communities, even some in the Midwest. Do you know that the first group of rabbis to meet from all denominations on a regular basis was the Texas Kala of Rabbis? I'm not even a board of rabbis. Oh, that's a board of rabbis. But the first one that went beyond the city and said, we are a community beyond urban boundaries. And way before it became very fashionable for Orthodox and conservative and Reform and Reconstructionist and whatever else to speak to each other Every year, Texas rabbis got together. From the most reform to the most traditional. Lovingly and with respect. That happened here because it had to happen here. You were isolated, you were alone, you had to reach out. I mean, wherever you go, you're in Houston, someone says, well, my family in Dallas knows you, you did the bar mitzvah of so-and-so. I always think that Gerry Klein could one day write a history of the world with all of these Jews. A friend of mine, we go everywhere, people come over, introduce themselves. A friend of mine, Rabbi Leonard Schoolman, said, there only are 12 Jews, the rest are mirrors. But that's true. Everywhere you go, there's somebody here, there's somebody there, or somebody here knows someone over there, or I was in Dallas, I'm in Jerusalem, and someone says, oh, I was in Dallas when you did the bar mitzvah of so-and-so. Or do you know so-and-so in Dallas? And even when I don't know them, I generally lie, because I don't want them to think I don't know them. Dallas, of all the Jewish communities in North America, is probably one of the most highly synagogue and temple identified communities. What's the number, 20% Los Angeles? At most. New York is not much better. And certainly Florida is almost like a wilderness. But Dallas is very highly religious institution identified. The role of the synagogue, the temple, as a center of faith, community, and service is very important here. And what's the problem is that most studies of synagogues in the United States and Canada have missed this story. I told Professor Larry Hoffman, good friend, who's doing all the Synagogue 2000 stuff. I guess you would call it Synagogue 3000 soon, because 2000 is ours. I said to Larry and to Ron Wolfson, professor at the University of Judaism Los Angeles, I said, you know something? All the stuff you're talking about, they're doing already. They said, where? I said, Dallas. But no one knows. No one. Now, part of that is due to the church, let's be honest. In this city, the non-Jews expect us to be members of religious institutions. Now that's okay. We've borrowed so many things from Christianity, and this is a good thing to borrow from Christianity. That they expect you to be members somewhere. That even a Roger Staubach studies in a Bible class. Can you imagine? I don't know if the New York Giants have ever seen a Bible. There is I will not talk about the present Dallas Cowboys. We'll put that aside for now. I leave that to my friend here, Dr. Mel Platt. He's the expert. But the reality is that the image in this city is what? That someone of distinction who's made it, who is a sports icon, who is a central figure, actually goes to Bible class. That's important to do. I remember preaching at Lover's Lane one Sunday morning, and I turned to Don Benton and I said, my God, 3 services. This is like Rosh Hashanah at Temple Emmanuel. And he says to me, Shelley, this is nothing. I have more people in classes on Sunday morning than I have in church at services. Or when you look at Highland Park United Methodist Church, and they have 300 support groups every week. That model of the synagogue or religious institution at the center of one's life is a Dallas Southwestern model. And it is not replicated anywhere else except a couple big churches in the United States. At the same time, other institutions have done well. So Committee, Congress, Hadassah, Council, Zionist Stuff, Golden Acres, Jewish Family Service, JCC. Not a big Jewish community, but you're getting bigger. And all these institutions have been part of Jewish life here for years. Not new. Interfaith is very, very much a part of us. Well, we felt we had to tell the non-Jews who we were, who we are. build communities of diversity, pluralism, and respect. We had to survive, but we did it. You look at the rabbis and the lay leaders of the South and Southwest, they have been the national leadership of the interfaith outreach from the Jewish community. Not in the North, Northeast, not in the Midwest, though some of the Midwest, but primarily the Southern leadership. Southern and Southwest. That's going to be your second book, Jerry. All about that influence. I'm going to tell you a true story, just to show you how interfaith can get you in trouble, right? I used to teach once a year at St. Michael's and All Angels. I had to read that because some people call it a different name. St. Michael's and All Angels church used to teach their Women of St. Michael's class. These classes, and once a year I would go and teach. And I would try to show them some of the correspondence between early Christian teaching and Jesus, and also some of the early rabbinic stuff. So the president of the Women of St. Michael's sent me a thank you and saying, you know, Rabbi Zimmerman, our rector is retiring, might you be interested? Don't laugh. There's some of you who said something similar in different ways. So I thought it was a joke. But a month later, I'm attending services at Lover's Lane United Methodist Church for a distinguished citizen who had died. And after the funeral, man runs up to me and says, Rabbi Zimmerman, you don't know who I am. I am so-and-so, and I'm a member of the search committee of St. Michael's and All Angels. There's a catch here, watch. So he says, and I know this is a funeral, and I don't want to say something that you're going to laugh at, but let me tell you what happened last night at the search committee meeting. At the end of the meeting, while we're going through these names handed us by the Episcopalian diocese, a woman at the back put up her hand and said, do you think Rabbi Zimmerman might be interested in the position? True story. And Don Benton can witness it because he was beside me at that point. But interfaith and being a part of the community and opening up the pulpits of other congregations, which seems like such a big deal in the North, is part of the life and fabric of this community from the start. But the most important part of what this community has been about has been our survival strategy. What does it mean to be a Jew in Dallas? And that's where I said it means to be a good neighbor and a good citizen. That's the way Dallas Jews learned to deal with being a minority in a highly identified Christian majority culture. Now, again, a true story. I come to Dallas, everyone's excited. Central Synagogue in New York had this feeding the homeless breakfast lunch thing with the churches. And so Zimmerman is obviously a social justice activist in the image of Levi Olin of blessed memory. Therefore, it's exciting. Come in and talk to us about social justice. So I, like a jerk, walked into my first social action committee meeting at Temple Emmanuel in Dallas. I'm walking, I'm a big shot after all of New York City Rabbi, Manhattan, Central Synagogue, and we take care of all these poor, homeless people and feed them. So I walk in ready to spout rabbinic spouting. And I look around the room. And again, I'm not naming names, but you know some of these people. President of the Visiting Nurses, actually two presidents of the Visiting Nurses Association are in the room. A woman who founded a shelter for battered and abused women and children. A leader in the city council, Dallas Area Rapid Transit, civic affairs leader. An early childhood education, people who have found Rhodes Terrace and early childhood education are in the room. Founders of a family shelter, people who've been tutoring and reading and all that stuff. People at the forefront of educational reform. People who already knew their names, major voices in all social services. At my first social action committee meeting, Shelley Zimmerman said hello, sat down, and I didn't open my mouth for the rest of the year. Later, you know, the vocal alcove, the AIDS outreach, Jacob's ladder, Jews at every level of major social service effort and educational effort. You see, I used to say to myself, they're all such good Jews. But I missed something. And what I missed was that was the strategy for survival of being a Jew in Dallas or in the Southwest. When you are small in number, when you have in your hands the future destiny of being Jewish, where you are a minority of minorities, the strategy of survival is, it's not what's on your head that counts, it's what you do with your hands and with your love and with your heart to make the community a better place for everybody. For when it is good for everybody, it is good for Jews. The reverse works as well. When it's bad for Jews, it's going to be bad for everybody else. I'm going to throw in just a word about Israel just for a second. When Israel is not permitted to fight terrorism, I'm not a big Sharon supporter, so let's put that aside. When Israel is not permitted to fight terrorism, and the story hasn't been told about what they found in these camps, would blow you away. Because the head of Birthright Israel, its lay head, is Minister Michael Melfier, the Deputy Foreign Minister. What he shared with us, which will come out eventually, is the mass amounts of weaponry and stuff that's there, the terrorism. Let me tell you something. If they get away with it there, what we saw at the World Trade Center is only the beginning. And I saw what happened at the World Trade Center with my own eyes from my office that terrible morning. When it's bad for the Jews, it's bad for the world. But the other side is true too. If it's good for the world, it'll be good for the Jews. And the stratagem of Dallas Jewry from the start was a community of high educational effort, a community which cares about those less fortunate, a community where integration and rights are part of who we are, a community in which those who are sick and alone need help, a community where we reach out with everything we have to make it a good place. That would be a good community for Dallas Jews. And it'll be a good community for the world. And that, I believe, is part of the genius of the Jews of Dallas. All the social justice stuff is not simply political activism, it is community welfare change. And it's all that message from Jeremiah. Remember, Jeremiah sends a letter to the Jews of Babylonia at the beginning of the 6th century before the Common Era, and he says, "Search out the welfare of the city in which you live, for in its welfare shall you have peace." That message was the message. And yes, all of you know I wanted you all to become Orthodox. You said that about me years ago. And all of you know I wanted you to be more ritualistic, and I wanted you to come to services. But all of it is tied to Tikkun Olam, breaking the world that was done. It is our job to put it back together again in a better way. Brokenness is not good. Healing is good. Brokenness is part of the process towards healing. We understood that here, and that's why so many of you, and we could write books about all of you, have done so much to make this a better place. Last point, and just a few thoughts about the future and my few concerns. One of the beautiful things about the Dallas Jewish community that we have this can-do spirit here, this pioneering spirit. We can do it. In most of this country, when you come up with a new idea, maybe some board of trustees meetings, but in most of this country, when you come up with a new idea, the answer is, let me tell you why we can't do it. Well, let me tell you why we can't do it now, Rabbi. It's such a good idea. Maybe in 5 years, in 6 years, you know. I'm not making that up. You've heard it yourselves. You've said it yourselves. But in Dallas, it's generally, how can we do it? How can we do it? That's that spirit of can-do, pioneering, doing something different. Now, part of it is because we're a young community. In New York City, the Jewish Family Service is older than the Dallas Jewish community. Same thing in Cincinnati. So there's so many turf lines. God forbid you should step 1 millimeter over somebody else's turf. The whole city's up in anger about, look what he did, look what they're doing, how can they do this? I mean, Federation alone in New York has over 120 agencies. Just remember that, buddy. Count your lucky stars that you won't have that much to worry about. You got plenty to worry about. That much you don't have to worry about. But the idea that turf doesn't count that much. It counts. I found that out a few times. But it doesn't count that much here. More is this essence of, you know, Shelley, we can do it. Tell us what we can do it. Now let me tell you what I'm concerned about. Just 3 things. It's really one. And then I'm going to be finished and I will have kept for the first time in my life the time limit. You know what they said? This pastor's wife sent him a little note. You all know that story, right? KISS. And the person sitting beside him, wasn't that wonderful? You sent your husband a kiss before he preached. He said, not at all. KISS is the acronym for keep it short, stupid. All right? Now, I'm worried that Dallas is going to lose that spirit. That's what worries me, okay? That we have so become pietistic and we have so become interested in not mimicking so much of what else is going on in the country that we sometimes lose that sense, the loyalty to what was and made this community great. That devotion to the welfare of the city. Getting young people involved, not just on a mitzvah day, but intimately in the life of what needs to be done for others. Not relegating service only to the schools, but service to others as part of what it means to be a Jew. Reflecting on with pride the great Dallas contribution. I'm not saying this sounds like a love song. There's plenty of criticism, but I didn't come here to criticize today. I came here to tell you that you have a mandate from history to keep alive the understandings of a Judaism in a free land in which we Jews as citizens of that land are full contributors in full measure to the welfare of the communities in which we live. And and I love Jewish education, and you've got to deepen your roots in Jewish education, and this city needs to do that because we're so embraced and so accepted. Our young people and our older people have to know that we're different in some ways. We've got to do that. Literacy is essential as an anchor in our acceptance. But we should never sell short the universalism of who we are and what we stand for. That would be a disservice. It would be a sin against all those, some of whom we agree with, who were proud Jews, some of whom died and said, never affiliated with any Jewish. We all know the names. But to those Jews alone in Dallas in years when there were so few of us here, who battled before air conditioning came and saved the whole Southwest. For those of us who are now here, we must be loyal forever to that legacy and to that sense of service. So I urge you to be loyal. I urge you to deepen your roots educationally, Jewishly. I'm so excited. All these reports about the wonderful new educational institutions that are being created here. Build on the uniqueness of who you are. Keep this community great because of its spirit because of its love, and keep this community great out of loyalty to what it aspired for and can yet become. Thank you.
People are going around, yes they do, that would be lovely. People are going around to collect the cards for questions, so if you have one, could you please pass it to one of the aisles?
Okay, all right, okay. One said, the Arab style of negotiating is to say one thing and to do another. Yeah, it's like some boards I've been in the subject to. Okay, now, how can we, just kidding, how can we, or Israel, negotiate with the constant bombings going on at the same time, talk peace? What can be understood or believed to achieve peace? Okay, I'm going to leave that. I'm going to leave the real essence of what's going on to Minister Melchior and to the people who are working day and night in Jerusalem. Listen, one of my problems, I told Judy this, on issues of this, on most issues, Judy is far, thank God, more liberal and to the left than I, and more humane. Except it comes to Israel, I'm not saying I'm more humane, but she tends to be more to the right than I. One of my problems is that I think Prime Minister Sharon has a very good get-into-it game and a very bad get-out-of-it game. It's like in chess. If you don't have a good end game, you're in real trouble. And I think we're seeing a little bit of a problem with the end game to start with. However, look, it's not a matter of screaming facts at each other. That's not going to make peace. And it's not going to be all this CNN business. And it's not going to be even Fox or NBC or MNBC or whatever it may be going on. The question is, we have two peoples with a claim to land. And there's just going to have to be some resolution of that. Now, whether they do it by a fence, can you imagine putting a fence down Hillcrest and saying, okay, we'll put the Palestinians on one side and the Israelis on the other side? It wouldn't be a very friendly street to travel on very long. I don't know how you do a fence or a Berlin Wall between the people. Whether it's some kind of international peacekeeping, I'm really not sure, and I don't think anybody is sure. Because Arafat just gives different messages, and Israel's being, I have never seen Israelis as depressed as they are. I've never, all these years. I spoke to Professor Barry Chazan at the Hebrew University, who works with me in Birthright, and I said, Barry, do you leave your home much? He says, no. They're afraid to go anywhere. They let their kids go anywhere. So, I don't know what the answer is. The Consul General of Israel gave a special briefing the other night. He said, Ambassador Pincus said, I am pessimistic in the short term and optimistic in the long term. In other words, there's going to be some really bad days ahead. But he is convinced that something good is going to come out of all of this. And it is our job to make sure that the facts are out there and that the President of the United States holds the course. I never believed I would have seen more support from Republicans than from Democrats. However, it is our job to make sure by constant faxes, more important than emails, by the way, sorry, Mort, still faxes, not emails, but they're getting there. We're getting, Mort Myers has tried to teach me for a long time how to become more literate. I think I've been far more successful with Mort Myerson in Torah study than he has ever been with me with computers. Faxes are way more than emails. and phone calls even more so. You've got to keep the president on course. You know, can you imagine if we had done what we did in Afghanistan? Imagine if the Israelis had done that in Israel. Bomb from the air. Janine, goodbye. Do you know how many boys and girls we've lost because we've gotten into this house-to-house, alley-to-alley fighting? We put our own young people at such a risk because we don't want to do that. And yet, even for that, we're not getting the full support. So that's very important. So, am I long-term optimistic? Yes. Very much so. Listen, when I came here, they said 100 people wouldn't come out Shabbos morning to study Torah at Temple Emmanuel. Right?
Right.
And despite the teachers, they came out every Shabbos. So I have to be optimistic. And I am. Do you think Dallas is ready for the Jewish high school that's being planned for opening in 2003? Is Dallas ready? Yeah, what's asking me for? I think Dallas is ready. It should be. If it isn't, it ought to be. And why isn't anybody offering me a job? All right. Now, how can Jewish leaders get themselves and other Jews to appreciate and take seriously Jewish table blessings, liturgy, and religious ritual? It's a good question. I tried so hard. We have to do a better job of it. I think we will eventually get there. That's a whole plan for the change of the North American Jewish world, and we can talk about that. But that can happen. It can happen. I believe that. We Jews did a wonderful thing. When the temple was destroyed, we shifted the altar to the home, and we made the home the center of Jewish life. We became very Protestantized in America and made the synagogue the center of Jewish life. Now we got to move it back a little bit. I think we can do it. But it has to be partnerships. We haven't thought about the partnerships yet. And part of the problem is that a more organized and national American Jewish life is going down the tubes. I have never seen a national community more set on its own destruction. That's for another lecture. If you invite me back. I worry about it. And I'm very worried about the ability of national institutions to impact and influence. All religion, like all politics, is local. I'm telling you that. And we just have to get the word out. All right, am I optimistic about peace? Yes. Rabbi somebody said there is a concern about the decline in male participation. How do we maintain a balance? One of the ways we maintain a balance is convince Jewish men that just because Jewish women are in synagogues doesn't mean they have to run away. It's okay to have women rabbis, women cantors, just because you have some... Now, by the way, it's a serious issue. I don't want to be flippant. And I sounded flippant. I'm sorry. Part of the issue is that wherever women have taken positions, men have run. It's an American phenomenon. And we have to find ways of re-engaging men in the life, in Jewish life. And one of the ways to do that is to change brotherhoods from simply being catering institutions into places where men can search for their spirituality in significant ways. I'm going to tell you something. I know almost no synagogues in this country, including Dallas, which spends any time on male spirituality at all. Female spirituality. Crystal rocks in the wind. Excuse me, Bobby. Every time someone's a spirituality thing, I hear ding-a-ling. The word I use is soulfulness. A fullness of neshama. That's what we're talking about. And it's about time the synagogues in North America where the troops are. Jews don't belong to anything else. Despite all the claims of national organizations, the central institution is the synagogue. Yes, council has a lot of women, Hadassah has a lot of women. You can count the roles of here and there. The real place where Jews are today is in synagogues, and it's time to see synagogues devoting time to the growth of Jewish male soulfulness. And that does not mean simply being ushered. The budding generation should as well. Now, the impact of assimilation and intermarriage, Gewalt. Let me tell you something. I don't want to go back to the medieval period. I don't want to go back to the ghetto. I don't want to be an isolated, insulated Jew. I want to be a member of the American community of human beings. There's a risk in that. It's the risk that was in Warsaw in the 1930s. In 1939, one out of every 5 marriages in Warsaw, not Berlin, Warsaw, was an intermarriage. That's a fact. Now, it's been the same all over. So the question we have to face is, how do we keep Jews Jewish? And that's not by taking them away from golf matches on Sunday afternoon to hear Zimmerman speak. All right? I understand that some of you are missing a very important out-of-the-woods experience today. You know, I think, I'm going to say this, Lee Berg, who's really one of the most cherished human beings I know, for him to have given up watching that show. Friday night's one thing. There's no golf on Friday night. But to come here is an extraordinary thing, Lee. Much appreciated. And I hope whomever you were betting on wins. It's good. Now, seriously, how do we keep Jews Jewish is the issue. And it's not simply by guitars, and it's not simply by yabba music, and it's not simply by all the glitz. We're talking about a revolution in knowledge, literacy, involvement, participation, opening the doors of our synagogues and temples and our institutions to many, somehow overcoming the extraordinary cost of being Jewish today. If you want to be Jewish today and be a member of a congregation and send your kids to a day school or high school and send them to a summer camp, you'll be bankrupt by tomorrow. Now, something's wrong with a wealthy Jewish community, the North American Jewish community, where to be Jewish, you have to make such sacrifices, that there is no room even to make a real choice. So when we put on our agenda, how do we keep Jews Jewish? And how do we bring young people close? And how do we make it reasonable for young people who may be making more than we did when we started, and now that they've begun their careers, not making it possible for them to come on board Jewishly and be a part of an organized Jewish community? We do that. We think it out. We can do it. Now, in terms of the intermarriage is going to continue. It's not going to go down. It may go down a little bit. How do you reach out to people effectively? And I don't like what the Reform movement does. It calls itself the Task Force on Outreach. Our job is not to reach out. Our job is the other side of reaching out, which is to bring people close. Call it Keruv. That's the Hebrew word. And it's time for us to do Keruv on our own Jews and on all those who are not Jewish, married to Jews. And guess what? The thousands out there who'd like to be Jewish, and with all due respect to some of us, would really raise our gene pool level. I say that to you because we Jews have too long said we're afraid to tell them about ourselves. We bought into what they did to us in the 4th century when Christianity forbade us from converting Christians to Jews. And we have bought into what the Muslims did to us when they forbade conversion to Jews. What I am suggesting to you is that it's time to say, this is who we are. It's wonderful to be Jewish. Look at this heritage and history and rich tapestry of existence. If you're looking for meaning, if you're looking for community, come on aboard. Doesn't mean we have to go out and be converting all the time. Bring people close. And if they're ready to become Jewish, they will. If they're not, at least they'll be friendly associates of the Jewish people. And guess what? We need some friendly associates. So that's another one. Okay, now, terrorism has become a self-fulfilling prophecy. Can be stopped by democratic means? I hope so, because I don't like the alternative. All right? Can federations and synagogues work together? Of course they can. We did it in Dallas. I think we did it in Dallas. We did it in Dallas. You can still do it. I think there has to be an organized attempt to share. And let me sound heretical. One of the greatnesses of the North American Jewish experience is that it is so autonomous. Unlike Europe, where the community ran everything, in North America, individual institutions run everything. So you have your synagogue, and I have my synagogue, and we have the synagogue we don't go to, and they have the synagogue they don't go to, and that rabbi we don't like, and this rabbi we like. This music we care for, that music we don't care for, and you're wearing a yarmulke on you, and you're more like I am. What are all these talesim and yarmulkes and this and that and all this Jewish stuff? I was once, by a very eminent jurist, told that I had invented Jewish holidays. Now, the holiday he was talking about, I wish I had invented. I'm not smart enough. But what I'm saying is, it's about time we loosened our turf, especially in Dallas where we can do that. And started saying there are issues of primary concern for the community as a whole. Let's do it together. You won't, I don't believe you lose members when you do that. Emmanuel and Sheriff did not lose members to each other when we had a joint course, an introductory course on Judaism. I understand that course is no more. What's happened to you? What's going on here? It's not that Temple can't do it better or Sheriff can't do it better. The point of the course was not about who could do it better. It was about us. We're one people. And if we can't study together and meet each other, if we have different youth groups where our kids never meet each other, there's something wrong. So you want federal? I mean, can you imagine the kids at Temple? How do they ever have activities with the kids from Sheriff? I'll just use those two examples. And I'm going to be critical. Why? Because there's something wrong with that. We may be two different movements, but we're the same Jew. I know because I buried plenty from Sheriff, and I buried plenty from Temple, and guess what? There's no difference. There's no difference. And when a community this size, which has the potential and the history of doing things together, there's something wrong. That's one of the reasons it's so damn expensive to be Jewish, because we're duplicating all the time instead of doing some exciting things together. I know you will attack me for that later. All right, last. All right. A quick report on Birthright. Birthright Israel was created by a number of philanthropists who came to the state of Israel and said, we believe that a free trip to Israel for those who have never gone before, between the ages of 18 to 26, can be a transformative experience which will change their lives forever. We are prepared, these 14 philanthropists, to put up $5 million apiece to make that happen. 2 of them doubled it by. The state of Israel came in with an equivalent amount of money. Never did it before in its history. For Jews outside Israel. One of the things that Birthright did was to insist that Brandeis University here and a special independent research group in Israel follow the trips. The first research is out. I'll make sure that it's available to you. Get it to the Dallas Jewish Historical Society. You have to be a member to read it. All right? Now, in this first piece that comes out, the free trip, among a whole group of the young people said that's what made the difference. That they could never go before because their parents couldn't afford to send them. Can you imagine 29,000? We never sent more than 1,500 a year in this age group. 2 years and a few months. Of that number, 20,000, almost 20,000 from North America. Now, of course, we're having trouble now getting them to go. Mainly because their parents attack me for being a person who sets children against parents. They are afraid to say no to their kids. Zimmerman, you say no. And I said, no, I won't. These are 18 to 26-year-olds. They're young adults. They can make up their own minds. We guarantee the security as best we can. We are working with the State of Israel constantly, 24 hours a day. Every bus is followed. We know to the 15-minute level where the bus is exactly. They don't have any free time. They can't wander Jerusalem. All these things. So one of our problems happen to be parents, and even I'm part of the problem because I'm a little nervous too. You don't know where you can go there and be safe. However, we have 200 kids from France there right now. We just said goodbye to 1,500 kids from the former Soviet Union who are there. You can tell me from the FSU and from France, it's safer to be in Israel than it is for Jews to be in those countries. True. Nonetheless, we're hoping this summer to up the numbers. The goal was 90,000 plus over a 5-year period. If any of you have some money to spare, we could use it, of course, because some of the federations have fallen far short in their contributions. But we're working on it. If the Brandeis study is correct, we now have almost 20,000 young Jewish adults back here who are waiting for the community to embrace them. That has been produced by only 2 years of a program. You'll read the research study, you'll see it, and then you're going to have to start saying to yourselves, Dallas, what are you doing to welcome 18 to 26-year-olds? Who are single, for the most part, who don't have kids for religious schools, and who, for the most part, most of them are not being reached by the organized Jewish community anywhere. But they're coming back ready. 1 year after the trip, their attitudinal change has not been diminished. This is a totally independent study. This isn't a rabbi preaching at you. I'm telling you the data. That means there's a group of young people, even in Dallas, waiting for you. Thank you for having me, and thank you for being here. And I look forward to many more times together.